Hey, welcome to the show. Today, Camden and I decided to dive into a little bit about performance and how how we can continue to improve our performance and really how we can be better performers overall. And it doesn't just apply to people on stage or in a game or a match. Performance, if you have the right attitude, is everything you do in life, whether it's recording a podcast, having dinner with your significant other, or even nowadays with all the apps and tools out there, how well you sleep. Sleeping is performance if you're really into getting to the high level and maximizing your potential.
No, exactly. And everything we're going to be talking about can be applied to just about anything in life. The sigmoid curves, as I'll define in a second, they're very natural things. It's when you talk about maturity and performance and growth, you're going to see that in animals and in life. It's literally every little thing is going to be like that. So diving in on that, so the sigmoid curves basically is an S-shaped curve. For those of you who haven't seen it, so it's going to mean that you're going to
sine wave, by the way.
So you're going to have a low growth rate at the very beginning. That's going to be your learning phase. Then from there, you're going to hit a area of sharp growth in your growth phase. Then eventually the curve flattens off in your maturity phase, and then you hit a decline eventually. And when we think about performance, most people like to think about it in a linear sense. We all like to say continuous improvement, right? Like we're getting better every day. The fact is, if you're putting in work every day, you're not necessarily getting it better every day. If you look at it in a business, when you're in the learning phase, you're putting in a lot of work at the very beginning. When you're getting started there at the beginning of your business, you're not really getting anything tangible back for it. You're not getting much accomplished in that you're seeing, at least tangibly. Then from there, when you get into that growth phase, the growth curve goes up. It's a very sharp curve. Things start moving and growing quickly. This is the exciting part. This is one everyone loves. To take a crop analogy, if you plant something, the learning phase is when your seeds are still underground. The growth phase is when they sprout up and they start growing like wildfire. And then eventually you hit maturity, and this is when your curve starts flattening off. Your performance isn't getting much better. It's kind of staying where it's at. You see this a lot in sports and things where teams kind of start to plateau a little bit. When they start to plateau, the next thing that always comes is a decline, unless you do have some sort of intervention. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today, is trying to find that intervention. So that decline is followed by another sigmoid curve if you look at it in the longer run, right? So if you're looking at in the example of a rugby team, you are going to have this huge growth where everyone's performance is getting so much better and so much better every single day, and it's awesome to be there. Then they might plateau a little bit, and then the performance can start dropping off. They get complacent, whatever it is in the mental game that slows them down, or the physical game. Then you as a coach have to be able to find an intervention, whether it's moving players around, changing your schedule, whatever it could be, that can try to jump you onto that next curve. So you don't have to go down into that low performance valley, if you will.
Yeah, well, one part about that I do disagree with, and it's only a mental state, but it's the decline. And the only reason that you would decline is you allow yourself in a mental state to decline. And the reason I say that is because if you put yourself in a mindset of constant improvement, and everything that you do, even though, let's say you make a bad decision and that sets you back 3 weeks or a month or whatever, well, that's still learning. So that's still improving. So
Right.
Curve, the data points, when you use you go the old school way and use a French curve, a little piece of plastic that has squiggly lines on it. For those of you who never been in that generation, that's how we used to draw these curves. We would collect the data, put them on a spreadsheet, put these points on a spreadsheet, and then you take a tool we call it a French curve, and there's all kinds of different ones. And boy, there's some thoughts there on why it's a French curve. Maybe because it was kind of wacky with the way it curved and stuff like that. Or maybe because a Frenchman invented it. I doubt it, but I think it's the wackiness of it. But you kind of tried to find a center line through these points. So
Right.
so yes, when you collect the data and you say, hey, how'd you do today? Well, I did crappy. So your points down here,
So
but your
I think
curve, you're still tracking.
right. And I think the difference there is when you look at what's being measured on the curve, I think you're looking at more measurable growth. Like if we're looking at it in the terms of business, we're looking at like sales, right? You're not hitting that sales point. You're not bringing any money into your business. You're putting work in and you're still improving. And you're obviously laying that important groundwork during the learning phase, but you're not getting your tangible reward. I think that's the difference there is it's not tangible. And
Yeah.
the thing you can do coaching wise is then if you look at it in terms of your end goal and what you're looking at long term, then you can have the mental reward of looking at what you're thinking long term, and that can be the tangible side of it. Even though you haven't built a building yet, you're still at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's true because if you think about it, when how do you measure when a team plateaus?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different things, and if you talk about a sports team, there's all these different elements in a game, in a match that come into play, and the end result is the score, right? That's the outcome that you want. You want to have more points than the opponent. That's the outcome. And if you look at it in that sense, in the sum of the parts and the whole, then yes, that was a downturn because okay, we're on a losing streak. We've lost 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look back at each individual part and piece, there's always there's always something that went right. I don't care how
Very
bad
true.
it went. There was, if it's football, there was somebody, I guarantee, in that 60 minutes of play that made a good tackle, that did a good block.
Mm-hmm.
Those may be the only two things in the 60 minutes of play for your team, but those are the things that you have to fix on and celebrate as a coach. That's what
Right.
I do. And that's one of the things I do with my clients is whenever I meet with my clients, the first thing we always start off with is what wins have you had since the last time we talked?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they struggle with it. Now, majority of them, after they get into a cycle of it, which is what you want, is to celebrate successes. Because if you focus on the negative, what happens? You become negative and you
Right.
never get better, right? Because you're just negative, negative, and you're in that spiral now. But if you find those successes, whatever they are, hey, Johnny, our middle linebacker, made a really good tackle
Mm-hmm.
on third down in the third quarter and kept them from getting the first down one time. Right? I mean, there we go. We celebrate that success.
Right. And I think even on a broader sense, it's something when you're going through and you're coaching to kind of take the sports example a little bit further. When you have a player who might be plateauing and they might be struggling and you have to get down on them to correct some mistake that was being made along the line, it's important to remind them overall that they are still on, they might be doing up and down as far as their performance goes, but if you're looking at the curve as a whole, they're going up. And that's the important thing that they never lose track of is even though they might have had a bad day at the office, as John always said back in the day, even if you had a bad day at the office, you're still making improvement in the long run, even if today wasn't the best day. And that's the thing that you can remember also, because that gets you working and looking towards that end goal.
So that's the job of the coach, right? That's
Exactly.
is to say, well, okay, well, yeah, you sucked on that piece, but let's look at all these other things and let's look at how you can take that thing that you did, that missed tackle,
Mm-hmm.
and improve on it. Why did you miss that tackle? Why did you, just like what we used to do on film day? Why'd you make that decision?
Right.
Why did you
Exactly.
decide to go right instead of left at this point in the game? Let's back it up. Let's look at the
Mhm.
data and train and learn and improve because until you take that thing that happened and improve on it, it's not a lesson learned. It's just an observation, right?
Right. And something we're kind of dancing around a little bit that I wanted to bring into this, I think we've touched it before in a previous episode, was the headwind tailwind asymmetry that we all feel. And so the basic idea of that is that you're going to feel the wind blowing in your face more than you'll feel the wind at your back, right? If you're going on a run, you forget about the wind at your back after 10 seconds. You're never going to forget the gust of wind that's hitting you in the face, right?
Try that
And
on a
that,
bike, a road bike, and then believe me, it's significant.
oh my gosh, I bet. But as you're going through, if you focus on that headwind, you wind up hurting yourself. Like you talked about, you get into that negative spiral. If all you think about is that headwind and the negative aspects of things that are going on, the things that are working against you, and you don't see the stuff behind you, you wind up in that negative mindset and in that negative spiral eventually. Bad timing on the sip of water when I finished there.
Yeah. Well, it really it goes back to the state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I really latched onto, and I still really find it as a fundamental piece from the IPEC training, the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching. One of the foundational principles is there's no mistakes. So if you think about that, why are there no mistakes? Why would that be a foundational principle? Well, the reason that is because if you think it's a mistake, you think it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
When we label things as a mistake, they're wrong. But if we look at everything we do as an opportunity, whether we meet our outcome or not, our desire, if we want 10 and we only got 8, is that a mistake or is that an opportunity? How do I get from 8 to 10? How do I improve by 2 more? Right. And that's the mental attitude, the mental adjustment that you can continue to, if you put yourself in that mindset, then you are in a state of how do I get better every day in everything that I do.
Right. And I think a big piece of that can be celebrating, you can call it the little wins, or, I've even said before, celebrate your losses because you learn from them, right? If you go out and you lose a rugby match and you can step back and look at the film and piece things together and then do better for the rest of the season. Hey, we got a long season. That's fine. That's a win in the long run. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example with U of A, we went out to New Mexico and lost to New Mexico Highlands. That's not something that should happen. But yeah, I can tell you that all of our young boys who were playing in that game needed that loss more than they needed a win that day. And it helped them get their heads screwed on straight and get back to work. Because if you go through, you're not looking at it like that, you're gonna have those bad days at the office more often.
Yeah, it's all about the mental state of mind. And one of the things I gotta throw out there before we go too far is the mathematical formula for performance. And a good friend of mine, Walter Aguilar, he's another IPEC coach. He's a great guy, lives in Canada, huge hockey fan, and coaches some young hockey players. So it's always fun to catch up with Walter and talk about the Avalanche, and then the guys who will be in the NHL in 5 years, because those are the guys that he coaches. So it's a lot of fun. But Walter taught me a couple of years ago that the mathematical formula for performance is equal to your self potential minus distractions. So if you think about that, what that means is I can't be Steph Curry. I can say, I'm going to put forth all this effort and do all these things, but God's only given me so much talent to play basketball. That's my full self potential. So I can maximize my self potential, but it's still only going to be here. Believe me, you can, because I have been that guy. I was that athlete growing up where I busted my butt on everything, but I didn't have the talent. So I only got so far. I only maximized my self potential. But when I maximized my self potential, I mitigated any distraction from my focus, which means that my performance potential went up. So didn't know we were getting into calculus here. And I start talking you, but you started us off with a sigmoid curve and sine waves and collection of data. But that's really what it is. So what are the distractions? What are those things that keep you from being focused in what it is you have to do? Whether it's whether you're on a phone call with somebody and you got email notifications either coming in on your computer screen or just dinging on your phone. Every time your phone dings when you're in a conversation, that's a distraction. right?
Oh yeah.
In the middle of a sentence, and you hear ding, right? Or you're typing a report or making a presentation, and you get the wonderful "Thank you very much, Mr. Microsoft." You know, you get the
The
flying
paperclip.
notification, huh?
The paperclip.
Yeah. Oh God, that was the worst
Oh,
idea. That
they don't
one.
even have the paperclip anymore, do they?
Oh, thank God, because everybody said it was stupid and it was a distraction. But you know, even now though, we still have those things that fly in
Hmm.
uh, on our computer screen. I've turned all mine off because uh, the one thing that still gets me though, and this is another ploy I think on our minds, is the red number.
Hmm.
It's on your phone. It's on your computer
Red's important.
screen. Yeah, yeah. Because what
Red
does
is.
red mean? It's important, right?
Yep.
That means you have to do it, and it's like, well, no, no, I don't. You know, it's not that important to me because it's a
Oh yeah.
distraction to what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to write an article or prepare a presentation and I got those things going on, or if I'm trying to record a podcast and I got flying notifications coming at
Mhm.
me, what's that going to do? I mean, and I'll be honest, it's just sitting here, and if the wind blows and I see the trees moving, that movement, because I'm a predator, the movement catches my eye and I see the movement. I'm
Oh
wondering
yeah.
what's going on. So even
Yep.
that is a
That's the
distraction.
And that's an interesting piece of it because we talk about this sometimes. That's a little bit of the lizard brain side of it, right? Is you there's so many aspects of things that trigger that type of primal instinct on us, and so you have to understand it. You have to look at it in that simple way of, hey, if you I'm one like this. I couldn't study on campus in between classes. It killed me because every single person that walked by, I had to look up at, make sure it wasn't a buddy of mine.
That must
And
be hereditary because I never studied in the library either because for
yeah,
that same reason.
I got to be at home, locked down, blinders on, because otherwise it's everything looking around you could be so important. You're always looking for things, and you got to figure out, what your habits are like then and fight them in that way. But I think, we're touching on something really, with the sigmoid curves and performance in general. We touched on this beginning. This can really be applied to just about everything in life. And I want to be careful we don't pigeonhole ourselves too much on sports, even though we do have a lot of areas we can talk about in that regard. But, when you're looking at it in life, business, these things can be short term or long term. So, yeah, crap. I just put myself back into the sports analogy. But if you're looking at it, you could have, you could have your sigmoid curves you're looking at over the course of a game, and you have your ones over the course of the season, right? So over the course of the season, you can have interventions that are lineup interventions, training changes, anything like that, nutritional changes, maybe even at the higher level, doing things to try to tweak the system so that your players are able to move forward and continue to excel and jump to that next sigmoid curve of continuous improvement, right? Then when you look at it in a game aspect, it's a little bit more black and white. So you mentioned earlier that your decline is always going to be mental. In a game of rugby, it's not always mental though. You have players who are physically declining, whether it's injury or just bumps and bruises over the course of a game. You're going to have players that are physically declining, and if you leave them out there for a little bit too long, they can get hurt or they can hurt the team, right? And so when you look at it in that regard, the anticipation has to come for looking for those preliminary warning signs of what is going to lead to this decline in performance. How can I address that? And then what is going to be my solution to mitigate that risk? So for the rugby example, it's you're looking around, seeing who's walking, seeing who looks like they might be a little tired, see who's getting lazy, and then, who do you have on your bench that you can bring in to address that type of problem? We call them impact players for a reason because they elevate your level of play. They jump you to that next sigmoid curve.
No, I think that's a great point. And how do you do that as in a sports arena as a coach, and then how do you do that in business as a business leader, and then how do you do that in life?
Mm.
What are those indicators? And I think the what you have to be able to do is in any of those situations, you have to have a threshold identification of that threshold. What is it? Uh, and then from that threshold, you develop indicators. And this is something to use the military. What we would do, particularly back in the Cold War days. One of the jobs we would do is we'd go sit out in a hole somewhere and we'd look for the Soviet Union to be coming to the West, to invade West Germany back in the day. And what we were required to do was report different elements. And these elements were indicators. Now, it may be, let's say it's a Jeep driving along. Well, a Jeep driving along is probably not an indicator that the main force regiment is coming in to invade.
Right.
But you know what? If there's 6 tanks and one of those tanks has 7 antennas on it and it has this kind of markings and this, that, and the other, guess what? That's an indicator that the main force regiment is coming in that direction. Well, we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing in life. And I do this with my clients too. And when we talk about triggers and what are our trigger points and what are those buttons that get pushed, when you start to establish indicators of that performance and how when something like that happens, somebody pisses you off while you're driving, what is that thing? And then how do you prevent it? By establishing an indicator so that it's coming. Well, you do the same thing in identifying a downturn in performance. And the better you get at it, the more success you have at it. And what that does is that mitigates the valley in your sigmoid curve. So if you think about your sigmoid curve being similar to a sine wave, where it has your performance is going up and then you have a downfall. What we want to do as leaders is we want to mitigate that valley. We want to identify that downfall as soon as the turn happens so that we don't go down any more than we have to. So that is a key point. It's a skill set that leaders have to learn and coaches have to learn about their players. How do those players, what's the performance of Johnny? Well, I know Johnny at the 45th minute, some days, some matches he can go another 15. Some matches I got to pull him at 45. But what are those indicators that me as the coach or the coaching team see in his performance so that I can lean over to you and say, hey Cam, get Fred ready because Johnny is coming out in the 46th minute. I can see. Look at his legs. Right. Look what he just did. Look how he stepped. And that's the critical piece. And we can do the same thing with our team and business. And to include personnel and performance of personnel and to include capital and see where our capital is going in that sigmoid flow of how our cash flow is and where it's going so that we can prevent the valley going down and becoming bankrupt and having to shut our business down.
Right. And something I think it goes really well with the sports analogy here, and it can connect everything else pretty easily too, is it's also about weighing the intervention, right? So when you're looking at it, so to take your example of Johnny and Fred on the rugby pitch, right? So you have to look at it. So if you think you could possibly get...
By the way, I was thinking about saying Seth and Liam, but I decided to say it's Johnny and Fred.
Well, hopefully they're listening to this. Well, so if Johnny could get 45 minutes or he could get 60 minutes, maybe he could even get an 80-minute game in, right? You should be weighing the intervention of, hey, maybe Fred can probably only give us 20 minutes, right? Then we might want to hold back a little bit more. Or, hey, Fred is much, much worse in the scrum than Johnny is. So maybe we need to stretch Johnny a little bit longer. Because if you look at it as just there's a decline and we need to intervene, then you're not looking at the full equation there, right? You got to be able to balance how steep that decline is going and know when to intervene and which intervention is the right one for that situation.
A business dude, you know what that's called? Cost benefit analysis, right?
Oh, yes, sir. Cost benefit analysis, exactly.
Yeah, you got to do that in everything you do. I mean, in business, a cost benefit analysis, we look at the bottom line. In sports, we look at the whole, if we're talking about individual players, we look at the whole player, or we take another step up and we look at, okay, well, we've got, if it's at the 45-minute mark and we're talking about a rugby game, we've got 35 more minutes to play, right?
Right.
So what does that affect? How long can this person play in this, and where's been our weakness, and is this person going to help mitigate that weakness that we had in the first 45 minutes, or is it going to compound it, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all those decision factors that come in that equate to a cost benefit analysis in the business world. And that's how you mitigate risk, right? Because as
Right.
a leader, your job is to accept risk. You identify it, you use all the tools you have in hand to identify that risk, and then your job is to accept it and determine how much risk you're willing to take. Because if me pulling Seth out at the 45th minute and putting Liam in means that, okay, well, I've got a little bit more speed and foot skill on the outside, but I'm losing the back ball because of that,
Right.
right? So how much is the other side kicking? So all these things, all these factors, whether we're talking about a sports match, a rugby match, or a business decision, hey, if I invest in this building, what are the possible outcomes? What are the things that can go right, and what are the things that can go wrong? What's my
Right.
benefit analysis? If I spend $100 on this widget, is it going to save me time in the next week or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in your building a house or remodeling, I like that metaphor
Tool
for this
shed, tool shed.
because
Always build a tool shed.
tool shed. Okay, so we're looking at our tool shed. Well, so we built our tool shed a little while ago now, right? And we're
Mm-hmm.
looking up at the roof on that, and we know that roof has pretty much reached its maturity of performance, right? It's keeping most of the water out, but there's a little bit coming in, and it's okay. When do I build the new roof? When is it worth the money for me to put that money in for the new roof? And if you wait too long, it's going to be a big mess. That's the
That's right.
big thing there.
That's right, because then you're gonna get water damage on your floor. Your
Mm-hmm.
lawnmower's gonna start rusting out. That electric weed eater you got, that fancy one, it's gonna short it out next time you plug it in, burn your house down. Think of all the terrible things that
Oh yeah,
leaky
gosh,
roof in the tool shed did.
this turned into a Allstate or state. Wait, Allstate,
Uh,
State Farm. Who's the mayhem guy?
yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, the
All
tool
right. Well,
shed is a
yeah.
mayhem.
Well, we threw a couple in there, so it's not a free ad for them, right?
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully they don't sue us, right?
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on that kind of ties into all of this is you were talking about how do you view those risks? How are you able to look at those warning signs so that you know when to have your intervention? And I think a big piece of this is you were touching on it being about practice, right? It's the experience, you looking at past performances and seeing what type of signs you have. But I think to go to our good friend Corey a little bit, you also need to look at it from a visualization perspective, right?
Mm.
If you haven't done this, if this is a unique situation, you can sit back and you can visualize, you can meditate on this really, and you can go through and try to picture what kind of warning signs you may be looking at. Kind of touches into the concept of the pre-mortem, right? If you're looking at the game and saying, okay, I've got a match against GCU tomorrow for U of A rugby. What could go wrong? How can GCU win this game? Not how are we going to win? How can GCU win this game? What mistakes can we make that they will be executing on? And if you look at it in that lens and you're looking at those type of things, you'll see those mistakes. You can fix those mistakes, then you can be more prepared in the long run. And it comes down to the visualization side. When I watched the boys in practice yesterday, I saw some things that when I'm watching them in the match Friday are going to be in the back of my mind of, hey, he's favoring that ankle I saw him twist on Wednesday, get the next guy ready, that type of stuff. And so it's all about, that type of visualization and getting yourself mentally prepared for the situation, even if you haven't experienced it before.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that goes for anything really. It doesn't have to be a sports match that you have to visualize. I mean, that's where everybody talks about it.
Mm-hmm.
Olympic athletes, like gymnasts, even NASCAR drivers. You'll see them pre-race with their eyes closed, leaning back and forth and visualizing the race and making passes and things like that.
I just want to say that the mental game of NASCAR, I've read a little bit into that. It is way, way, way more than you ever would have thought.
Oh, well, yeah, shit. These dudes are driving 200 miles an hour for 3 hours. Think about the mental focus that required.
Mm-hmm. You mess up
And
once,
guess what? Guess what? We complain about driving I-70 across Kansas. These boys are driving. They ain't even driving across Kansas. They're driving in a loop.
Oh yeah, they don't even get
Seeing the
to see a
same
new
thing.
cornfield. They see the same thing every time.
Yep. Yep. The only thing that changes is the tire marks on the wall when there's a crash.
Well, tying that back into performance real quick, if I can. I know there's different types of racing for this as well, but it made me think of running like track versus cross country. I was one I could wrap my head around cross country because you're running through the woods. You're going on this nice long run and you're changing scenery. Could you imagine running a 5K on a track? Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that's terrible. Like
Been
you
there,
just
done that.
repetitive, right?
Oh yeah. But
Street running.
you have to block out those things that, going back to the distractions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Block those things out. But I want to get back to the visualization,
Yeah,
the fact that it's, even in the business world, you know, uh, I work with a lot of vets that are transitioning out of active duty and going into the civilian workforce and doing job interviews and things like that. And one of the things I've talked with a few of them about when it comes up is visualizing that job interview.
yeah.
Visualize how you're going to answer questions. Visualize what questions may be asked and how you think how you should answer them and what the actions are and all those things. And I'll even throw this. I visualized my neck surgery that I had five
Mm-hmm.
plus months ago. I visualized laying on the table, going under anesthetics, how the doctor was going to cut into my neck, pull things apart, move muscles and tendons around, and then put the bolts in to hold my neck together. I visualized that before it happened. And you know what? I went from being extremely anxious and having anxiety about the
Mm-hmm.
surgery to being confident about the outcome because I knew I had visualized the success of that surgery. And you can do the same thing, whether it's a business meeting, a job interview, dinner with your wife, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
You can visualize that and create the outcome that you want to create through that visualization.
Oh, exactly. I 100% agree. And that visualization can give you the tools you need to anticipate that decline in performance and make sure you're jumping in the next sigmoid curve, mitigating that loss in the valley, right?
No, I think that's the key point. I'm glad you brought that back to that because going back to it, that's as a leader, that's your job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is say, oh, here it comes. Either brace for impact or all ahead, full left, and avoid the iceberg. One of those two sort of things, right? And hopefully you see it in time so you don't have to brace for impact and you can make those changes and mitigate the valley in your curve of performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a pretty good stopping point for us today. So, what did you learn today, Dad?
Well, sigmoid. Is that a play on Sigmund
Do I need,
Freud? But
I'll get a quick Google on that.
sigmoid, the sigmoid curve is something I hadn't heard about until we started prepping for this, and even after doing a little bit of reading about it, uh, it still was something that hadn't come up on any of the performance things I'd done. So it's an interesting thing, and anytime that you can put some quantification and
Mm-hmm.
mathematical data to something, I think it makes it a little bit more. It 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 makes the theory easier to grasp, if you will. We're not we're not doing that wazoo uh, theoretical thing. We've actually got some data that we can look at and say, oh, okay, yeah, sigmoid curve, yeah, it may
Mm-hmm.
be sigmoid curve, but now I understand what that means. I don't know who sigmoid is, but
My quick Google didn't show anything on that, so I didn't see anything pop up when I was doing my research
all right.
into
Well,
it. But
we'll put a link to a sigmoid curve definition in our show notes. How about
perfect. Well, I would say the biggest thing I learned is that you can use visualization in these types of situations that you're unaware of to try to mitigate that valley, like we've been talking about. That's something, when you look at this, it comes off so black and white. You're gonna have your curve and it's gonna be perfect, but things don't work that way. It's a fundamental thing when you have these curves, like you were saying, they're made up of all these little data points, and it's about seeing those data points individually, seeing the curve, and then telling the story between the two. And I think that's the important thing there, definitely.
Oh, great, great. Well, thanks for joining us today, and I hope you have a great week. And I hope our friend Sigmoid gives you a few nuggets to how you can perform at the highest level and on a continuous basis.